And I thought about it and I said, I wonder what was the most evil thing that I experienced in the White House. And I immediately popped to mind was Joe Biden's very close association with Theodore McCarrick. They had a very close friendship. It was like Theodore McCarrick was a spiritual advisor. And the meetings that he had led me to realize that he was instrumental in getting Pope Francis installed. The more I looked into it, the more I began to believe that McCarrick all along has been a CIA asset. He was groomed to be a CIA asset. There's a leverage idea what the CIA uses. If they find out McCarrick is a guy who likes having sex with men, he may be approachable to them as an agent, as an asset. And my question in the book is, are all these Catholic donors that he's been raising money with all these years, are their initial CIA?
My name is Joe McClain. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
There is a book out that details the connections of the deep state and the deep church to infiltrate and to subvert Holy Mother Church and her will to help bring about the salvation of all souls on planet Earth. In fact, Cardinal McCarrick, the former Cardinal McCarrick, Theodore, who will never spend a day of his life in jail for the many crimes that he has committed, is at the heart of the story. And we're going to link to it. The book is called An Almost Insurmountable Evil: How Obama's Deep State Defiled the Church, the Catholic Church, and Executed the Wuhan Pandemic. We're going to link to it at the stationofthecross.com/ACT. But Mike McCormick joins us now to discuss it. Mike, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Joe. Good to talk with you.
So you spent, what was it? Did you say 13 or 15 years in the White House? Tell me about that first.
Yeah, I was a White House stenographer. I started there as a contractor in 2002. And our job, we worked with a White House press office. So there was a team of us, and the job was to record whatever the president or the vice president or the press secretary said in the presence of the media. So the daily briefing, we have a stenographer in the room who records that, and then there's a transcript that the team types up. I would travel on Air Force One. I would travel on Air Force Two.
Wow.
The years I worked in Obama's White House, I was working mostly with Joe Biden and traveled around the world with him. And once he got out of office and I got a hold of the Hunter Biden laptop, I got a copy of it from the Marco Polo group. They said, you know a lot about Joe Biden. I had written a couple of books self-published about Joe Biden. They said, you know a lot about him. You should dig into this. So I dug into that, and I wrote and published on a Substack, Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil, what I found, and that eventually became that book behind me, The Case to Impeach and Imprison Joe Biden. And then about a year ago, just about a year ago in the spring last year, I was watching Alex Jones, and he was talking about this feeling of almost overwhelming evil. And I thought about it, and I said, I wonder what was the most evil thing that I experienced in the White House. And I immediately popped to mind was Joe Biden's very close association with Theodore McCarrick. They had a very close friendship. It was like Theodore McCarrick was a spiritual advisor.
Wow.
And by then, we knew what McCarrick really was behind the scenes. So what I did is I went to the White House website for Obama's White House and looked in their visitor logs, and I typed in McCarrick's name. And what I saw was shocking because he was very closely connected to them with meetings with Dennis McDonough, basically over the course of all 8 years of their, and they were in office. And the meetings that he had led me to realize that he was instrumental in getting Pope Francis installed. The more I looked into it, the more I began to believe that McCarrick all along has been a CIA asset. He was groomed to be a CIA asset from his early years.
Now, explain that to me, because I like, how does a young priest, how does he have anything to do with official state, whether it's the Department of State or any intelligence agency? How does that actually happen?
Yeah, that's what's shocking. But, so go back to the 60s. This is the Cold War era. He comes out of this seminary. He was a New Yorker, comes out of the seminary and came down and went to Catholic University. And the CIA was known for looking into Catholic universities at the time for potential agents. Well, McCarrick's there at Catholic, and he's a seminarian, and there's a leverage idea what the CIA uses. If they find out McCarrick is a guy who likes having sex with men, he may be approachable to them as an agent, as an asset. And so he goes through Catholic University. What Catholic University teaches him to do is be a fundraiser. So he starts to go around the world, and he has the magic fundraising ability. He gets all this money from unnamed Catholic donors. And my question in the book is, are all these Catholic donors that he's been raising money with all these years, are their initial CIA? So he gets all this money, and then the first assignment they gave him was to go down to Puerto Rico. If you remember at that time, Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Caribbean was a hotbed of CIA activity. And so I think it was a sensitive assignment, and he picked up Spanish language there. So then in the 90s, he makes his way up through the priesthood. He's raising money for the Archbishop of New York, gets to be a bishop in New Jersey. And in the mid-90s, they put him in the State Department and make him, the Vatican sort of allows him to be a State Department global ambassador of freedom of religion. And they start sending him overseas. They send him to China. He goes to China 8 times. It's not like he's going to, Haiti. He did go there, but he also went to China. He went to Iran. So he didn't go to the poverty-stricken places where, you would be doing ministry. He went to the politically sensitive places. And that's what he was doing. And he would go there and give out money to people, to the archbishops and things like, and the priests in the regions.
Yeah, Julia Maloney in her book, The St. Gallen Mafia, she detailed some of these. And I even interviewed James Grind, who was his case that got him defrocked out of the Vatican. And even James would say he would travel with McCarrick and he would have these envelopes full of cash. Like, where do you get all of this cash from? It's like, was the USAID backing all of that? Like, it just seems crazy to me that everybody said they knew once the story broke in the summer of shame of 2018. But before that, if you knew and said nothing, then where are we at? It's like we've helped to make the monster that was McCarrick, that clearly, as you're seeming to indicate, that the deep state was happy to use to their advantage to subvert Holy Mother Church. So let me go back and ask you then, okay, so what exactly do we know of what was his involvement in getting Francis on the chair? We do know that there was a video after the election where he boasted publicly about lobbying for Bergoglio, but beyond that, what do we know?
So that's what comes out in these White House visitor accounts. And I looked into the McCarrick report the Vatican put out. And and my understanding of that Vatican report is it was a whitewash. It was a cover story. They were protecting themselves. And looking also at what Archbishop Pagano has written over the years, his accusatory letters. And I emailed back and forth with Archbishop Pagano. He's been very supportive of what I'm doing. He's in the book. A lot of it, if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have this information about McCarrick and the Pope together. He confronted Pope Francis in 2013, in the June of 2013. So to get to your question, what happened was McCarrick had this long association with traveling, and he knew who Bergoglio was. And in 2011, McCarrick went to Buenos Aires and visited Bergoglio, and that's in the McCarrick report. But so then in 2012, he's going in and visiting Dennis McDonough in the White House probably every 2 or 3 months. He has a lot of personal contact with Joe Biden. He was the guy that was always front and center at the St. Patrick's Day events at the White House. Both Obama and Biden. He was always on the state floor visiting them for holiday parties and things like that. So he's close to them. He's close to McDonough. McDonough has 2 brothers who took holy orders. One is since retired, and one is he's kind of been demoted. He had a high-profile job in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and he's been demoted because he was covering for pedophile priests. So McDonough has a background in understanding the dark side of what was going on in the church. What happened was on September 12th, 2012, so the day after Benghazi, McDonough gives a speech at Catholic University. And McDonough's boss at the time was he worked directly for Tom Donilon, who was a national security advisor. Donilon was a graduate of Catholic University. He was also a longtime Joe Biden operative. So he gives a speech at Catholic University. McCarrick introduces him. So they have this connection there in public at Catholic University. McDonough's speech is about, Obama's this great guy. He's been great with the church, all this stuff. A month later, McCarrick goes to Buenos Aires. That is October 2012. In December, he goes back to Buenos Aires, 2012. Both of those are noted in the McCarrick report, the Vatican McCarrick report, but they're not discussed. They don't talk about who he met with down there or why he was there. It's just like a brief mention. Oh, yeah, he was down there, traveled there in October 2012 and December 2012. That's 6 weeks before Pope Benedict resigns. So he's there. And then what happens when Benedict resigns in February? McCarrick just happens to be in the area. He just happens to pop up and be in Rome. He's there he's in the audience when Benedict announces his resignation. And then he starts lobbying immediately for Bergoglio. And then it becomes this sort of behind the scenes. And remember, this is a guy who's been handing out envelopes of cash to bishops and priests all around the world for 20 years. And all of a sudden, he's the guy who's in the Curia going, we want Bergoglio. We want Bergoglio.
Why do you think Benedict XVI would have allowed that? I mean, didn't Benedict XVI suppress McCarrick? That's what we were told, that he suppressed McCarrick, but yet McCarrick is sitting there in the audience as he's making his resignation.
Right. We were told he was suppressed, but he didn't really stop. He kind of cut back. I talk about that a little bit in the book. He got some cover from, the Biden administration gave him cover. He had high-profile backers, always in the government, and the Vatican didn't really want to disturb that relationship. I mean, he passed physically money on to Benedict and to Pope John Paul. I mean, he donated to them.
I want to ask you, Mike, in your time in the White House, I mean, you got to experience various administrations. What was the Obama administration like in comparison to, say, the 1 year you had with the first Trump administration? Did you see, was the differences perceptible? Was daily work life different? Was the attitude, the mood amongst the staff, was there any differences there that stood out to you?
Well, in the Obama years, I worked with Biden, who was very active, very aggressive to want to be the next president. That was his behind-the-scenes goal. And so he was very aggressive. I went to the Vatican with him in 2016, in the spring of 2016. He was doing the cancer moonshot, and he did a speech with the Pope Francis there. Hunter Biden was on that trip. I got a chance to sort of walk around in the back rooms of the Vatican. Never met the Pope. Was in the auditorium when he did his thing. And frankly, to be honest with you, I'd heard from other White House people who had been in the presence of Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict's presence, and they had this, very deep reverence for it. I didn't feel that with Pope Francis. So
interesting.
With the difference between Obama, Biden, and Trump came in as a disruptor. And frankly, Obama and Biden had set up a whole human trafficking program that started in 2014. And Trump came in out of the blue. They didn't expect it. And he won. And he stood right in front of what they were doing with the cartels on the border. And he put up his border wall and started talking about restricting. And he did. And one of the things, and so that really impacted it. From that point on, they had to get rid of him. They had a whole thing set up. They set it up in 2014. There was a huge crisis called the unaccompanied minor crisis. All these kids started showing up at the southern border in the spring and summer of 2014. And what's really unusual, if you look back in time, Obama went to the Vatican for his first visit with Pope Francis in March of 2014. And it would be really interesting to me to see if when these kids started showing up at the border was soon after that meeting. I think that's what happened. Because by the end of the summer fall, over 60,000 kids had come to the border, some as young as 4, all of them parentless, and they were taken in by the cartels. Coyotes took them there. And the question is, who told them to go there? Who told their families this was a good idea? Somebody told their families, look, let your kids go to the border, they'll be fine. And they can go with these cartel guys. And they did terrible things to some of those kids. Most of them were 14 to 17-year-old boys. There was a lot of girls. Terrible things were done to them. So that became, over the summer, the Alliance for Prosperity. And this is where McCarrick comes in. He starts going into the White House, meeting with Dennis McDonough. At the time they're setting up this Alliance for Prosperity, the government in Honduras, who had been recently installed by the U.S., was smuggling cocaine into the United States by the ton. The president of Honduras is a guy named Juan Orlando Hernandez, was allied with the Sinaloa cartel. And he was on tape with DEA agents from February of 2014, his brother was on tape talking about how he and his brother were going to smuggle cocaine in with the government. So the DEA knew it. And that tells me when the intelligence community knows it, the White House knows it, and they ignored it. So who comes into the White House in July of 2014? Juan Orlando Hernandez, the drug smuggler. And that's almost within weeks. They have a series of meetings with McDonough and McCarrick in the White House, and that's all documented. And then that becomes the Alliance for Prosperity that Joe Biden made his pet project. In 2014, he rolls out $1.5 billion of taxpayer money to go to Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, 3 little Central American countries that were basically the source of all these migrant kids. Well, that was just seed money to set up what became the southern border free-for-all with the cartels in 2021 once Joe Biden got back in. And that's the evil that was there. It was there all along. And Trump stood in front of it. And that's where they had to get rid of Trump.
You know, I can imagine a lot of people who might hear this would say, this sounds too fanciful. It sounds too Hollywood. It's too far out there. It's too conspiratorial. It can't be believed. And yet, I mean, I can appreciate that. Of course, it does sound, crazy. But at the same time, George Weigel, in his book, The End in the Beginning, he wrote about JP2 and how JP2 knew which archbishops, which cardinals, which members of the Curia were on the payroll of the KGB. He never fired them. He knew who they were, and he never fired them. He tolerated them because he thought it would be, it'd be too risky for Poland if he took drastic action. But he knew that they were there. These were ordained men, and they were at high levels in the Curia. Similarly, Operation Gladio, it basically tells a sordid story of the origins of the CIA, which had deep Vatican connections post-World War II. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And they used the Vatican Bank to process a lot of money from these mafias to run drugs into America, et cetera, et cetera. It sounds crazy, Mike. What would you say to somebody who just can't wrap their head around it?
All right, so go to the movie The Two Popes that was done about Bergoglio. It's a Hollywood fiction. I personally think it's a CIA front story. But in that movie, they talk about Bergoglio's past in Argentina when he's working closely with the right-wing dictators. And that was done in the 70s. And then so he sort of comes out of this period, and there's a lot of suspicion about him where priests are killed by there was a division. Some of the church was going towards the communists. Some of the church was going towards the right-wing dictators. And the dictators were brutal. That was the silent war. Well, Bergoglio is part of that. He's on sort of meeting with the dictators. And that comes out in this movie. And that was called Operation Condor by the CIA. And they were the ones that put the dictators in power. So the CIA was backing Argentinian politicians when Bergoglio was a priest moving up the ladder. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover with the CIA, and it's time to get the CIA out of the church. It's gone too far. This thing is just disgusting what they've done along the southern border with Joe Biden.
Why do you think Francis hasn't been back to Argentina since his election?
I didn't know that. I don't know. I didn't hear that. I don't think they like him that much down there. I've heard that from people who traveled through Argentina, and I told them about my book, and they're like, he's not really well liked down there. And these are just sort of tourist people, but, that's an anecdotal comment, but that's what I know.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.